Mark Selby, CEO of Canada Nickel, advancing the Crawford nickel sulfide deposit to a construction decision later this year and unlocking the world's largest nickel sulfide district with the Timmins Nickel District.
So easy, isn't it?
So
Just
easy.
so easy.
Yeah.
The world's largest nickel district. I'm in your backyard. Thank you very much for having us.
Welcome to sunny, cold Toronto.
And 45,000 of my closest friends outside
Exactly,
as well.
yes.
It's busy out there, right?
It is busy. $5,000 gold
yeah.
tends to do that.
It starts a trend, that's
Yeah.
for sure.
Yeah.
But you're also busy. You're wall to wall. I've been trying to, find a slot. Here we are on Sunday, trying to speak to you. But you're wall to wall this week as well, right? So nickel's back in vogue.
Yep. Oh no, two big things. Last time we talked was right after we got the 1P endorsement from the Ontario government. And so as the only project in Canada that's both got a federal and provincial endorsement, that's got a lot of worldwide attention. There are a lot of people we're talking to already. There's a lot more people at the door with that. And then, more importantly, we've talked on the Nickel Show multiple times about, what's happening with Indonesia, and we're seeing a real fundamental shift in Indonesia moving from a big overhang on the market to becoming, supportive in terms of maximizing value as opposed to maximizing volume. And so, since we last talked on the Nickel Show last Sunday, there's 1 week where Chinese New Year where everybody's off, and then there's a second week where people kind of work their way back to work. And so just before Chinese New Year and this sort of get back to work week are always good indicators in terms of, is there a real sustained trend going on? So, what was great was we saw the whole ore NPI stainless price move heading into Chinese New Year. So people are a little nervous. I want to tuck a little away before I go away on holiday. And the fact that before everybody gets back, again, we've seen ore NPI and stainless prices move again. So, nickel prices to date, are up about 30% to date. And what we've seen on all of the physical metrics as well, seeing prices move 25 to 40%.
Right.
So, and the most marginal stuff up 40%. So that, that says there's probably going to be upward pressure. And again, I think we'll get to, 18,500 to 20,000 before the end of March.
Ahead of schedule. Lovely.
Yep.
But the impact of this in terms of the banks, our dear friends, the banks, analysts, etc., and people are kind of writing this up. They do want to see kind of sustained growth, and also just let's hang around here for a bit as well, because it has been quite erratic over the past 3 years, right? So do you feel that is it a momentum play, or is this a fundamentals play?
No, this is a sustained fundamental shift in the nickel market. Everybody, it was easy for investors, fund managers, analysts to say, I don't need to pay attention to nickel. Every time I start to get a little bit interested, Indonesia just kind of gives me a whack across the face. But, we've got a slide in our investor deck where we kind of outline, all the things that happened since last July that the Indonesian government, it wasn't just a minister woke up mid-December and said, we want to freeze supply at last year's price. They put a whole series of different policy initiatives in place starting last summer all the way through the fall, and then that was kind of the final step. So the Indonesian government has been taking lots of steps for them to maximize value, and as we've talked about on the show, it's like 1 out of 8 export dollars in Indonesia has nickel in it. So it is this massive lever for them to pull. And the other piece is they've got a big fiscal deficit right now, and they introduced a tiered royalty system where there's a higher tier at 18,000, another tier at 21, another tier at 24, and another tier all the way up at 31. I don't think nickel price is going to 31,000 anytime soon. But again, if governments have a chance to make more money, they usually try and take that chance to make more money. So that again, so you've got this both fiscal and balance of payments reason why it just makes sense for Indonesia to keep down this track.
Right. So they're actually putting these mechanisms in place to ensure the likelihood that they can control pricing in the market. As I say, we've talked about them being the sort of OPEC of the nickel market, because it's in their interest. But some of the other things that they've been doing in terms of with the companies operating in country, how's it been for them?
So that's the part. I mean, whether they're picking on them because they're public companies, then they know they have to disclose it. But both Vale and Aramet, who are two of the Western companies that trade, have operated in that area for a long time, they both put out statements that said the ore quota thing was having an impact on their ability, to mine their nickel industries as well. They got more quota than they had last year, but they got less than what they were expecting heading into 2026. So again, some very clear public markers that, yeah, they're serious about managing nickel supply.
Okay, and how's China reacting to this?
I mean, again, I'm sure behind the scenes there's a little bit of back and forth, and I don't know whether the Chinese companies have been impacted by the same as the Western companies. Indonesia is a fairly corrupt country still, unfortunately, and so whether the Chinese companies are providing the necessary incentives to be able to maintain ore quotas that Western companies maybe aren't able to do, given governance standards, I don't know. We'll see what happens. But again, the key thing for me is, ore prices that lead into nickel pig iron prices, that lead into stainless prices, they've all moved 25 to 40%.
Oh, wow.
Some of them are at 3-year highs. Some of them are getting close to 3-year highs. At a point in time where nickel prices were closer to $24,000, $25,000 a ton. So.
Okay, so on a fundamentals basis, this is looking good.
Yeah.
And for Western companies like yours, what's the way to kind of play this? Because obviously we speak to nickel companies, some are big and some are small.
Yeah.
And, they got it, but they all have one thing in common. They need to get kind of funded to do what they think that they can do.
Yeah.
So access to capital is one of those kind of big questions. What does a company like yourself do?
Well, so that's the big plus for us is very few of us, right? There's a handful of us, and I know each of the people in the space quite well have been able to do it. But because nickel's been so out of favor, it's been very difficult. So the great thing is, as the market turns back to nickel, as investors look at nickel opportunities, there really is a half a dozen companies that have been able to actively move their projects forward. We're one of them. We've generally done it with strategic investors and so forth through that time frame. And so, as we move forward here, we're very well positioned to take advantage of this nickel move. And again, what's nice for us is the fact that with these government endorsements, this government's funding's coming. Again, it's taking longer than we would like. I thought with PDAC there might be a couple of announcements this week, but governments get things done on government time. Yeah. And again, for us, it's not a question of just if, but a question of when these dollars show up. So.
Right. Okay. And just on that, how the Canadian government is behaving, then it's not just talk. There are actual funds and capital pools available to deliver against very specific goals and targets, right?
Yeah.
So you obviously been the beneficiary of quite a few of those things.
Yes.
So you can just remind us all, because what I'm trying to understand as an investor is like, right, okay, here's a company with a kind of big capex play with a big NPV, nearly $3 billion, NPV 8 numbers. It's one of the biggest projects in the kind of Western Hemisphere, right? Yeah. You need funding. You've got to get that financial stack's got to look good. But the Canadian government seems to have done a lot of the heavy lifting there, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So the key piece for us is that within the capital stack, the debt, again, we've had some LOIs with different agencies, and we've got good visibility on that. The equity is the key question, and $600 million of the billion is we qualify for 2 refundable tax credit programs that, again, were announced several years ago, have finally made their way into law, and we think we'll be in a position to take advantage of. We have Samsung SDI there to buy 10% of the project for $100 million US.
Yeah.
That's a multiple of where we're trading today, and we're solving for $300 million. And the nice thing is, the province announced a critical minerals processing fund. They announced it during the campaign last March. They got the program in place in December. And so, given that we're a 1P project, we should be one of the first in line to get funds out of that fund. In terms of the federal government, last budget, they put a new $2 billion critical mineral sovereign fund to give them some new tools to play with. They're making an even bigger infrastructure, expanded critical minerals infrastructure fund to take care of more of the infrastructure required to get a mine built. Again, as a major projects office in the government, referred to as PONIs, projects of national interest. Not to do with my height. So again, that's another pool of capital on top of the several other existing envelopes of funding. And then when you go globally, the Canadian government has worked with the G7, There's a whole, the French government has a fund, the German government has a fund. I was in Europe last week with the Canadian government in Italy, Germany, and France.
Right.
And again, those are very real relationships, and those are very real, working together to be able to, again, Germany and France aren't going to be building 12 critical minerals mines, but they want those critical minerals, and so they're prepared to help fund other G7 countries' mining projects to be able to get them built.
Interesting. Yeah. Giddy up, I think we say.
Exactly.
Okay, so that's great. The Canadian government is you're bouncing around Europe and introducing you to big capital pools.
Yeah.
Who may want to share on the amount of nickel that you pull out of the ground. Just in terms of what you're doing on the ground, I've seen a few things going on. Obviously, the last 12 months, you've done this in an accelerated time frame, which is very, very commendable. We're talking mostly about Crawford here. You've got a whole bunch of other things sitting behind this, right?
Yeah. So
Reed,
Reed,
goes on.
Midlothian. Yeah. So in terms of Crawford, it's permitting, engineering, financing.
Yeah.
So we're waiting for the government. Oramet, who we've done several deals with as a bridge to major events in the past.
Yeah.
They're bridging us until May. Gives us some more money to be able to get going with the engineering.
Yeah.
We appointed Asenco to get going on the detail engineering. Great track record. And good to have them back. And first thing is to look at the long lead item calendar and understand, what we need to order when, because the last time we did that was about 16 months ago, and those things do change. And then on the permitting front, again, we're on target to get our federal permit in this summer, hopefully earlier part of the summer than later. And then on the provincial side, this one project, one process, again, it's real. We already have a team in place that's going to help us, and we're very happy with the team. We had a good relationship with all the permitting people we did before, but again, having this formal process in place, they've already got our main person, good track record in industry and government, and fantastic working relationship with them, and so we'll drive on that front. And then once we get through Crawford, the other announcements that we've had over the last couple of weeks with Midlothian. There's aurorite deposits. There's a couple of those globally. Midlothian is because it's dunite, not peridotite, the nickel content's 30% higher than some of these other deposits. It looks like most of it showed up in aurorite, so we're just doing the metallurgy now to understand, how much of that aurorite will actually be recoverable. But Davis tube recoverable nickel is the term in aurorite, so we're going to be doing all of that kind of testing on our deposit. But the initial indications are all great. And then we published the resource earlier in the year and put out the technical report. And again, it's is a footprint that's much larger than Crawford. Lower strip ratio, less overburden. We always talk about Crawford being our first project and not our best project. And Midlothian and Reed, along with Man West, are all potentially much better than Crawford.
Talk to me about scale, because obviously, what's the life of mine in Crawford?
40 years.
40 years.
Yeah.
Okay, that's a long period of time. But it's quite a lot of nickel coming out of the ground. If you have a kind of a sequence of other projects of similar sizes, similar capital requirements, but you've got something like Crawford, which is up and running, someone's like the beneficiary of that. How do you kind of sequence the activity? How do you prioritize activity with regards to some of the follow-up ones? Or is this literally saying, like, I've shown you how it's done, here are some others which individual separate companies can develop within the district. So you have multiple companies operating within the district. And how does the Canadian government support that or feel about that?
I mean, part of the reason, again, there's not a long list of near shovel-ready projects in the critical mineral space, but we're one of them, and we're one of the projects that got chosen. And it is that district scale, the fact that there are multiple projects behind this. There's infrastructure in place. There's community and First Nation support in place, and so. The model that I was always impressed with was First Quantum back in the 1990s, 2000s. They successfully developed a whole series of mines in Africa. And they had one oxide processing line and they had one sulfide processing line, and they literally cut and paste that at several different mining operations with Africa. Did it cheaper and faster than anyone else, and created huge amounts of value at that time. again, given the geology and the mineralogy of these deposits, we're in a similar situation to be able to do that. So, Crawford is 2 lines and ultimately will be 50,000, just under 50,000 tons of nickel. The same mining rate applied to Reed, you're getting up to 75,000 tons of nickel a year, and you could actually support 3 milling lines, on that.
Right.
Midlothian and Man West is very early days, but again, the scale of what's there could easily support two or three lines at each, and so you can say, in over 10 or 15 year period, you can get to 250 or 300,000 tons of nickel potentially coming out of this district. And whether we do it all, whether we have joint venture partners on 3 or 4 separate projects, we sell a project to someone else and let them build it in the area. I mean, the good thing is to have the resource in the ground. And advance it enough so that you've got that optionality that's there. So
right, and then for you in value terms, we need to get Crawford done. We need one and done there, and then you think that the other projects should start to achieve a kind of valuation sooner and quicker than, say, Crawford's? Because Crawford had to walk so that others could run, right?
Oh, 100%. And Crawford, Crawford's been hampered by nickel being out of favor, right? So just going, we're trading sort of right now at probably 15% of NAV. Where typically if you're in favor, if you're a gold or silver copper project at a similar stage, you'd be trading at closer to 50% of NAV. So we'll benefit from the re-rate from nickel over the next 12 months when people realize, okay, Indonesia is serious about managing prices and managing supply, and then when you start to load up all of these other projects, behind that value curve times some very big values, you can get to a pretty exciting overall value. I mean, the thing I say to people, if you had a chance to go buy the oil sands in the 1950s and pick up, that assembly, if you got to go into the Atacama Desert in Chile and pick up, that's the scale of what we have in, relative to the nickel market. So
right. So nickel price coming back, it's got to help everyone. Metal prices moving always does, but at the end of the day, you've got a bunch of stuff to deliver this year.
Yeah.
You're waiting on obviously the government on a little bit on the money side of things, some of the money side of things this year. But do you feel that, what does 2026 end up looking like for you?
Yeah, we're basically in a position to be able to make a construction decision, by the end of the year with the permitting, engineering, funding package in place. Again, seasonality, we have to do it either by January or wait 9 months until September, October. But again, all of that's within a relatively tight time frame versus other projects and versus where we are. And again, once that one horse is out of the door, we've got a whole stable of horses to follow alongside. As a pony of that. As a pony. So there you go.
Well, brilliant. Thanks for the catch up.
All right.
Good to see you in person in your own backyard.
There you go.
So we will see you and talk at nickel market in a couple of weeks or so, I suspect.
I think next week.
Because it's exciting times, right? It's really moving.
Yeah, very much so.